either hand, if people have questions, you either hand the mic around or you can just repeat the question however you prefer.
Hey everyone. It's 1:35, so I guess we should get started. Everybody have a good lunch?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Well, let's start off by first giving a huge round of applause to all the organizers and volunteers of DrupalCamp New Jersey who have done such a great job putting this all together. And let's not forget to give a big hand of applause to the sponsors and for the great lunch out there. You guys are just awesome. Thank you. So this is configuration as dependency, also known as managing Drupal 8 configuration with Git and Composer. This is the third time I've given this presentation. I don't know, anybody here go up to DrupalCamp New Hampshire or DrupalCamp New England? Yeah? Okay, so you may have already seen this presentation, and so go see something else. This is not important. This is not a code-heavy presentation. This is more a discussion about philosophy and strategy than actual implementation and code. So if some of you guys were looking for a real code-heavy thing, go see something else. My name is Erich Beyrent. I am a senior developer at BioRaft. We were talking earlier in the opening presentation about Drupal birthdays, and it occurred to me that I had no idea what my Drupal birthday was, so I went and looked, and I have been a member of the Drupal community for 11 years and 8 months. So I started on Drupal 4.6. Don't clap for me. I'm no hero.
You're just old.
Those are my contact things. I've contributed a bunch of modules to Drupal 6 and 7. One of the modules that I contributed was actually rolled into Drupal 7 core, the permissions API. So if any of you guys programmatically assign permissions and work with roles and stuff, that was largely my work. I have to say though that even though I've got this really big vanity slide up here, I'm really standing on the shoulders of giants. Everybody who has worked on the Drupal 8 configuration management system, everybody who has helped put together some of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about. I really had very little to do here. Donald Trump doesn't like me. I'm trying to start a flame war with him. So if everybody's appropriately triggered now, we can move on. The people who really put together the content of this presentation are Moshe Weitzman. If you don't know Moshe, you probably haven't been in the community for very long. Besides being just an amazing person and developer, he has contributed so much to the Drupal community over, I don't know, forever. And then Justin Lilberger is one of my co-workers at BioRaft. He's out in San Jose. He's one of my absolute most favorite people in the world. They put together most of the ideas that we're going to be talking about here today, not specifically about the Drupal configuration management system, but how we're going to be using it today. So they get most of the credit, not me. Our agenda today, we're going to be doing a brief overview of how Drupal 8's configuration management system works. And when I say brief, I mean maybe the first third of this session we'll just give an overview. I'm not an expert on CMI. There are many resources out on the interwebs that are much more detailed than I could possibly be, but it's kind of important to go over a few things as part of this discussion. We'll talk about some strategies for managing your Git repository. Everybody here knows what Git is. We'll talk about using Composer and Drupal console. This is probably the most contentious part of the session because Moshe hates it when I talk about Drupal console because he's so heavily involved with Drush. But Drush can be used in a lot of different ways too. And then we'll talk about multi-site considerations. And when I say multi-site, I mean real Drupal multi-site. So this talk is not for everyone. If you don't use Drupal multi-site, or if you work alone, if you edit your stuff on production, you don't use version control at all, this is not for you. There's other sessions that are for you. But by way of show of hands here, who here has or is currently working on Drupal multi-site projects? All right. I was getting really worried because it seems like in the last couple of years, especially with Drupal 8, multi-site has become like a really dirty word. I'm glad we're all nasty developers here, and we're our own little basket of deplorables working on multi-site projects, so that's awesome. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today are going to feel really kind of strange and foreign initially, but I hope by the end of the discussion they'll kind of make sense, at least to understand why we're talking about what we're talking about. All right, configuration management. So, where we were prior to Drupal 8, we had some problems, didn't we? Configuration could not be easily represented in code, right? Configuration changes performed by clients and or professional services could not easily be represented in the code without going through a patch release or more traditional developer cycle. So in terms of configuration management, who here can tell me what ways pre-Drupal 8 you managed configuration deployments? Features, great. You get a free BioRef pen. What else?
Update hooks.
Update hook. You don't get one because you work for BioRef. Just don't talk. So yes, features, update hooks, UI. Who said UI? You get a free BioRef. Right. So. Now, how many of you let your clients make configuration changes on production?
Oh, I do.
You do, okay. So how do you deal with the changes that your clients make in production when you have to make possibly conflicting changes in your code?
Before I make mine, I do a re-export, look for what they've changed, commit that, and then I do mine. So
Okay.
they don't have to worry about it.
So did everybody hear that? Yep, she captures the
You should
changes.
repeat it anyway.
Yep, she captures the changes, she exports them from the production, commits that, looks for diffs, and then goes and makes the changes. So you get a free BioRef.
Yay!
Okay. All right, so can everybody here agree that that's a pain in the ass? All right. So Drupal 8 goals for configuration management allow non-developers to change configurations safely. And when I say safely, that means in a way in which you as developers and site owners are not overriding other people's changes accidentally. Clients can safely change configurations to the extent in which they are allowed. You guys are all familiar, I think, probably with the strong arm module, and there are other modules in Drupal 8 that prevent clients from it basically makes the configuration read-only. There are modules in Drupal 8 that provide an audit trail of configuration changes, which is a really useful thing if you do have clients that are making changes. And then it's very easy to automatically create new instances of sites with default configurations. So thank you, Drupal 8, for that. All right, there are two types of configuration in Drupal 8. There's simple configuration, and there's complex configuration, otherwise known as configuration entities. So simple configuration, who knows what that is? You in the back? Nope. Okay, so simple configuration stores basic information such as Boolean values, integers, strings, text, whatever. It has exactly one copy or version, and it's somewhat similar to using variable get and variable set in Drupal 7 and earlier. Okay, so that's simple configuration. Configuration entities are like content types, and they enable the creation of 0 or more items that, and support more complex configurations. So example of configuration entities include views, content types, image styles, that sort of thing. All right, so what's so great about Drupal 8 CMI? It standardizes the configuration export into YAML files. Who knows what YAML stands for?
Yet another markup.
Okay, I don't have enough pens to give everybody. Sorry. Yes, yet another markup language. Okay. It is used for both simple config and config entities. So again, fields, views, workflows, roles. The system is designed to optimize the process of moving configuration between instances of the same site. Okay. It's not used as a migration tool. Drupal then stores that configuration in the database, but what's really, really cool is that you can swap out where you save your configuration to something like MongoDB or Redis or some other favorite key value store that you want to use. So it's really flexible that way. This is a sea change, though, as Alex Bott tells us. It used to be that modules would present their own configuration and would be in control of that configuration, which would be stored in custom tables or with variable set. In Drupal 8, sites own their configuration, not the modules. So what does that mean? It means that modules have a config directory within their structure, and that configuration gets imported when you turn on the module. It gets imported into the database, and from that point on, the site owns the configuration. Okay? Oops. And to scroll down here. So, when a module is installed, that default configuration is read out of the files, and it's imported into what's called the site's active configuration. All default configuration entities are assigned a UUID or universally unique identifier during the install process. And what this allows Drupal 8 to do is to discern the difference between a rename or a deletion or a creation, so you don't stomp on configurations. All right, so it basically works like this. On your development site, you've got your own active configuration, the things that you're actively changing. You then go and export that as individual files or as a tarball. You then commit that or whatever you do, and then load that into your production instance or your staging instance or whatever happens to be, which then takes the contents of those files and puts it into that active configuration store. You do have the ability to do a diff of the configurations and reject things that you don't want, or you can synchronize them all. This then, like I said, takes whatever's in the active store and replaces it with this stuff. So, again, pre-Drupal 8, modules use variable get and set or custom tables or features, as we said before. It was kind of like the Wild West. You never knew what you were going to get. And because you're dealing with contrib modules and your own custom modules, you probably had maybe 2 or 3 different systems of managing configuration. Drupal 8 gets rid of all that, and it gives you one system with the same tools for editing default configurations. Those default configurations are stored in YAML files, are stored with the module, and then again, once the module is installed, the site now owns the configuration, and those YAML files are copied to the site-wide config directory when you export. Now this is a little contentious, or has been a little contentious with some people, because now module maintainers always have to use update hooks rather than making simple configuration changes with variable sets and variable gets. So it's a trade-off. I think it gives you more flexibility, to each their own. One other thing to make note of is that once you, sir?
You said it was contentious. Are there any other arguments against it other than it's just easier not to do that? There's actually any arguments?
I'm sure there's several arguments. I think some of it is people are used to the way that they're doing it, or they think that their way is more flexible or easier to do. And if you look at some of the update hooks, like for example, if you look at the group module for Drupal 8, and you look at its update hooks for a good example of how configuration management is updated as part of an update hook, it's definitely more complex than variable set and variable get. But like Trump, this is the way it is, get used to it. Sorry. I don't usually get political. So one other caveat here. When you have a module and it's already been installed, and you go and make changes to the default configuration as part of your module, and you expect that that configuration is going to get loaded, guess what? It doesn't. If you go and make changes to that default configuration as part of the module's config, it only gets imported when you install the module. So you have to, again, you have to sync that in another way. All right. It also has a robust system for managing hard and soft or optional dependencies. So a hard dependency is when you have content type A, and it depends on a field that's defined in content type B over here. If module B does not get installed, guess what? Module A does not get installed either. So that's a hard dependency. An optional or a soft dependency is maybe something like a block definition over here, or an optional field, and where it doesn't matter if that gets enabled or not. Drupal 8 also handles nested module dependencies, so when you go and you export your configuration, it automatically figures out the entire dependency tree for you, and so you get all the bits and pieces that you expect to be there. All right. So that's all I'm going to talk about in terms of the CMI. As I said, I'm not a guru on this stuff. These are far, far better resources. These are modules that you might use as you're developing. Peter, you work on some of these, right? Config log was yours?
I helped on that at some point.
Yeah. So if you do any kind of configuration development in Drupal 8, you probably want to use one or some of these modules. Another really good, useful resource is a video on something called DrupalNights.org, which is it's like a get-together that's sponsored by BioRaft, where we have speakers in the community. They come and they do hour-long presentations once a month. And we have, over the last 3 years, built up a huge library of discussions. This topic is one of them. There's a video of me standing up there doing the same spiel. Moshe's presentation on how configuration management works is up there as well. So that's a really good resource. If you don't know very much about CMI, or you'd really like to, go watch the video. It's awesome. All right. Matthew Tiff tells us that there is no recommended workflow for Drupal 8 configuration management. And what that means is there's more than one way to do it. Those of you who may have experience in the Perl community have seen that little acronym maybe once or twice. So what Matthew means by this is the D8 system is highly configurable and flexible enough to use in many different workflows. It is designed to work with a single site dev, staging, production workflow in mind, as I said. But it does support things like configuration, read-only, and other workflows. And we're going to talk about some of those different workflows. But we can't talk about those workflows without talking about Git. So Drupal 8 system was really lends itself to using Git. Let's just put it that way, okay? So what it does is it allows you to store your site configuration as code, and it allows your version control systems to be used to manage dependencies and branching and merging and conflict resolution. One of the really cool things about Git specifically is it has this thing called the Git recorded resolution cache, which is a mouthful, but basically what that means is once you have a resolution, you have a conflict in Git, and you resolve that conflict, it stores the details of how you resolve that conflict so that next time that resolution will be automatically applied. So that's a really cool thing. We'll get into where that comes into play a little bit later. But the crux of this is that when we're talking about configuration management, you can create two repositories. So the first repository contains your code, your custom code, your themes, that sort of thing. The second repository contains your exported configuration. And this part, when Moshe first told me about this idea, this was pretty much my reaction, like, what are you talking about? Why do we want to have two repositories for this? That's crazy. Yes, there's two of them. Here's why we want to use two repositories, okay? We can use Git to manage individual site differences and manage conflict resolution. The separation of config versus code is very similar to how we separate business logic from display logic, okay? What this allows you to do is create configurations for all your sites that can be branched off of, say, a master configuration. So those of you who are using multi-site, this is really something powerful. So let's say you've got a base platform that you want to extend. So let's talk, maybe it's something like Sony BMG, okay? Everybody knows Sony BMG has all of these different artists, right? But they all basically use the same platform, and each instance of that platform is slightly different. So what Adele has for her instance, I don't even know if she's a Sony BMG person, it's going to be completely different than, say, what Metallica's going to have, right? So Adele's going to have pictures that are appropriate for her stuff, and Metallica's going to have pictures of them setting fire to things and peeing on things. And so the configuration is going to be completely different. If we are not using branches for each of our different overrides, it becomes a lot more difficult to manage. So what we can do here is, like I said, you have a master configuration, then each client, each multi-site is a branch off of that master and it has its specific overrides. You can then merge in your changes whenever you have to update your master configuration, merge those into each of the client branches. You can also pull down versions of the configuration that they've changed on production and then merge in your changes that way. So the other great thing is that you can version your configurations and then pull them in with Composer. Who does not know what Composer is? Everybody knows? No. Awesome. Okay. So I'm not even going to talk about what it is. But when we're talking about building Drupal 8 websites, your configuration is just another dependency. It's no different than having dependent modules or dependent themes. You've got your website, you've got your code, your configuration is how you put those things together, how you've got those things configured. So that can be thought of as another dependency. And if you start thinking of it as a dependency, it becomes natural to start thinking about pulling in that dependency with Composer. So what you can do is you can take your export configuration, put it in your configuration repository, you can tag it, and then you specify what version of the configuration you want your composer.json. So when you build your site, now you get the appropriate version of the configuration. It kind of looks like this, and this is the only code that you're going to see in this entire presentation. This is a snippet of composer.json. You can see up at the top there, we're defining where we're going to get packages for our Drupal modules and for Drupal core itself. Then we have another repository down below. It's just a Git repository, and that's where our configuration is stored. So that's just the definition of repositories. In your require section, where you normally go and you specify, I want path auto and panels, and I want these specific versions of the modules, you also put in the configurations that you want and the versions you want. The last part of this is telling it that you definitely want the source as your preferred source of install. This is a Composer flag. I think there are a number of different options that are supported there, but for configuration, we use source. So when you define your Drupal site in composer.json, and I hope you all are doing this, for Drupal 8, your repository that you manage yourself should have a composer.json file, and it should only have your custom code. Drupal core should not be committed in there. Modules should not be committed in there. All those things should be fetched by Composer and then built as production artifacts. So what I mean by that is you're going to have a staging environment or some kind of a build environment that's going to run Composer install. It's going to go and fetch all the dependencies that you have, build everything up, and then that's what you're going to deploy to your production. Okay? So this is what a bare checkout looks like of a modern Drupal 8 repository. You then go and you run your Composer install, and it does this sort of thing, and it goes on forever and ever and ever, even if you only have a few dependencies. And then you get well, it looks like this. So above, that's again bare, and then below, there's Drupal core has already been pulled down, and your vendor directory is now filled with all the Symfony stuff and everything else that is a dependent library, modules, and the way that we have it set up is that our configuration that comes from our config repo gets stored in this config directory, then prefixed with the name of the specific customer, or the specific site rather. Modules go into web modules contrib, our custom stuff goes into web modules custom, so on and so forth. Composer also allows you to do other things like tack on scripts that run at different choke points. So there's, think of these like Drupal hooks, there's a pre-install, there's a scaffold, there's an update. You could, if you have specific things that you need to do, like move directories around or do this or do that, you can add on your own scripts at the appropriate point to go and manipulate directories. So, again, we've got a master branch which contains the default configuration for all of our modules. So what that means is we've gone and we've installed the site, we've installed all of our dependencies, then we've exported the configuration, and boom, now we have our master configuration. We then take that master configuration and we branch off of that for each individual client. For the site to work, we need both repositories. We need the config, we need the code. Now the way that we do this is we use a feature of Git called Git subtree split. And what that allows you to do is take a portion of your Git repository, a directory if you will, and split that off into its own repo. Okay, so that's what we do with our exported master configuration. We take it out of our primary repository, the Git subtree split, it gets put into its own repository, we remove it, and then what you do is you add it back in by adding a Git remote so that you can still go ahead and make commits and that sort of thing. The reason why we do this is that when you're making changes to the configuration, either for a client-specific or for your master configuration, you only have one pull request to do. You only have one merge to do. If that configuration exists in both repositories, now you've got two, and you can't do it as a single transaction, and then the history gets all kind of munged up. So that's a pain. So how does this work for workflow? As developers, we get tickets in Jira or Trello or whatever tool du jour you're working with. You create a branch for each one of those cards. You do your work. You export your configuration, merge it in, the PR gets approved, so on and so forth. The configuration repo will be available to edit configs for sites where the modules are already enabled. If you're updating stuff, you have to write an update hook, and then that same YAML will have to be added to the module for sites wherever it was never enabled. So in a multi-site configuration, you may have module A enabled for site 1 and site 2, but not site 3. You go and you've got your configuration for site 1 and site 2. You probably want to add that configuration to site 3 as well, in the case that that module ever gets enabled at some point. So more benefits of doing this. When you're working on a feature, a specific version of that configuration can be used that won't conflict with other features being developed by other developers. So Bob over here is working on version 1.3 of the configuration, and Susan is over here and she's working on version whatever. It's done independently, there's no conflicts. If a problem does arise with a specific configuration, because we're tagging our configurations and managing with Composer, you can roll back that configuration. So you've identified, you pulled down 1.3 of your configuration, you're testing it, you've come to the conclusion that there's some breaking change in there. You go back into your composer.json, you set the tag back to the previous version, Composer update, boom. Now you're back to where you were. The other benefit is that you can take all of these configurations for an entire site, and you can build a complete replica of a customer site without any customer data. You can build it from scratch for debugging, because now you've got the configurations completely separate. And as I said earlier, if you are in the process of merging in configuration changes either into the master configuration or merging in customer configuration and your changes conflict there, you've got Git's resolution management, and it will remember how you resolve that conflict. Okay, so again, this does help in diagnosing whether a specific configuration is actually solved rather than just solved for a particular piece of data. That's really, really important. And it also helps with testing unique configuration considerations. So at BioRaft, we have our base platform, and then individual clients or customers have specific overrides. I'm sure some of you have dealt with this before in terms of taxonomy. Maybe you call it foo in your master configuration, but they want to call it foobar. Okay? So this allows you to have those separate configurations without stomping on anything or putting various switches or string overrides or whatever in your code. You can actually put that in the configuration. And this does have the potential to assist with new site rollouts, because if you've got a brand new site, even let's say you've got a generic base platform that you're using for your content platforms, right? And now you've got a new customer that wants a new bunch of content. You can easily spin up a new instance to base off of that by just taking a copy of that stable configuration and pulling it into your new project. So now you've got a clean slate to build off of. What else can we do? How about theme repositories? Some of us have junior themers. Some people allow customers to make changes to the themes. Why not let them have their own repositories? Tag those repositories, pull them in with Composer. Why not? All right. So multi-site configuration requirements. For it to be a Drupal multi-site, the number of sites must be greater than or equal to 2. Configuration defaults exist and may need to be updated. Each site may have unique configurations or configuration overrides. Both the simple config, like say the site name. So again, you use Sony BMG, their default configuration just might be music site. But Adele's name is Adele, and Metallica's is what Metallica says. Configuration entities may need to be overridden as well. So again, taxonomy, menu, content types. Maybe this particular content type has an additional field. Config may need to be changed for a single site or for a group of sites. And conflict management varies from case to case. There are some cases where your customer makes a change to the configuration and your specific update is going to conflict with that. Another example is different wording for particular geographic regions. I'm not talking necessarily string translations or those sorts of things, but maybe you have particular phrases in your configuration or in your UI which are just inherently different. Those can be managed in configuration. All right, so to test all this out, Moshe went ahead and put together a repository, and he put it up on GitHub so everybody can go and play with it. There's a nice README there. You can check it out. You can clone it. You can fork it. And you can play with how all this works. Create a Drupal 8 install, pull in this repository via composer.json, set up some multiple sites, and just play around with how the different configuration works. It's pretty cool. This is just me reiterating again what this looks like. So our multi-site, that's our code repo on the left. Our config repo on the right. We use git subtree split to pull the master configuration out of the primary repo into the configuration repo, and we create client branches off of that. Okay, when you do that, then you delete the master configuration out of your primary, because that's just referred to with a git agg-remote. Now, when we're talking about customer changes, I assume you guys are all doing automated database backups, correct? Yeah, you back up your clients' databases on a nightly manner? If you're not, don't raise your hand. I don't want to know. So, tack onto that process, okay? Do an export using Drush or Drupal console. Do an export of your client's configuration. Then do a git diff against whatever version is the latest version in your client's repository. If there are differences, commit the export you just did. Okay? So now you've automatically updated your repos, and you can tag them automatically as well. Now you've automatically updated your config repository for each one of your clients. All this stuff can be automated. So these are the sorts of commands that you would add for setting out the remotes, and then you would do your checkouts on the remote configuration. You can do your merges and your commits by doing git cherry pick and then git push, and that's sort of the workflow for making changes to the configuration repository. So this is what we just talked about. The nightly backup process includes a dump of the configuration, look for changes, git commit, git push.
Do you script that previous slide?
I'm sorry, what?
You script the previous slide?
It
Should be two different.
no, there isn't. The question was, is there a script? You would have to write the script.
Yeah, I just wondered if you script that.
These are for when you've got your code repository and you want to add it. You want to be able to make
I
commits.
just meant maybe if you had a script that had a clean way of pulling the ones cherry pick, so you don't have to find them yourself.
Right. Okay. So is there a way to script this? So yes. Remember earlier we were talking about Composer and those commit hooks, or those different hooks that you can install. You could easily script this and hack that into the Composer install process to set that up.
You have to intelligently figure out which ones were.
Yeah, it would have to intelligently figure out what's what. But it could be done. Okay, yes, that's where we are. Okay, so in summary, multi-site projects have unique config requirements, as you guys all know. The proposed workflow should be able to handle all of those requirements elegantly. We are all in the business of writing code, writing themes, writing awesome content. We shouldn't have to think too hard about the configuration management. So that's what I mean when I say elegantly. You should also automate as much of the process as possible to reduce cognitive overhead, so that we can focus on what we all really care about. In the end, you shouldn't really even have to think about configuration. It should just happen. Automation can happen with Jenkins, Circle CI. You can build temporary instances with Probo or some other automated build tool, Platform SH, I'm sure. Resources that you may want to use when you're looking at all this stuff and trying to figure out how it all works. And then questions and answers. Sir.
Thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. So one of the major limitations I've experienced working with these slightly more exotic workflows is that large platform as a service hosting options won't really support them in what you've demonstrated. You sort of have your own hosting, but Acquia, Pantheon, Platform, SH, really you have to commit everything and push it all as one. So do you have a strategy for mitigating that?
Okay, so the question for those of you in the back, this is great unless you're using a hosted platform where they force you into a specific workflow. And do I have any tips for doing something like this in those platforms? And the answer is no, because I haven't worked in any of those platforms. But there are some of those folks on this floor with their tables.
I would also say you could treat their code repository just as receiving your build artifacts.
You could treat their repository as receiving your build artifacts. So you could do this whole process. What Peter's saying is you could build this whole process on your own, have a build platform that goes and pulls in everything, runs the Composer install, then take the result of that, commit that into another repository, and then push that up to Platform or Acquia or whatever.
Yeah, and that's why I look for so in my public documentation, the sort of workflow that we tell people is using there is not extremely big. I work with a lot of customers who have sort of deep workflow and there are ways around it.
So the answer is, if you have problems with this kind of stuff, see her.
Well, hold on a second. Peter, go ahead and let her.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Hi, I'm Christina Wood. I work for Opera, and so I'm Christina Wood. I work for Opera, and the question was, if you are hosting a site with one of the major hosting companies, there are issues of people feeling that they feel sort of funneled into a certain workflow that doesn't work with some of these older workflows, and even though it's published on the sort of public-facing user documentation of how you're supposed to manage your environments and such, there are, at least, I don't know about the other ones work, but and I mean, there are ways around it. We have customers who are doing various different workflows that are not necessarily what is on our public documentation that's used by like 95% of users. So there's ways around it.
Any other questions? Sir?
We can say, like GitLab just learned, automating your backups, test your backups.
Good point.
So you don't find out the hard way.
Yes, from my ancient sysadmin days before I started doing Drupal, we learned that the hard way a couple times.
Who tests their backups? All of my years of working in this field, I have never worked with a company that had a regular system for doing a test and store backup.
So this
I've met system administrators that recommended it.
Yeah.
And they said, look, we have to actually prove the theory that.
I've never worked with an actual company in basically my entire career that actually did that actually tested a backup restore. I've known administrators who worked at various companies that strongly recommended it, and GitLab certainly, should know way better. But it is absolutely shocking that I've never seen a single company that actually just does that proves that they can restore from a backup.
I will say that in the past, it was a lot more difficult because you had to spin up whole VMs and you had to get your images all set and everything had to be all ready to go, and then you had to have hardware laying around that you could go test these things. Now when you've got services like platform.sh and you've got Provo, you can just spin these things up in literally a minute. Or even if you're doing, what's the other du jour thing of Docker containers. You can even do it with a Docker container now, so there's no excuse now. It was harder before. Sir? Oh, hold on, Peter's coming.
Can you talk a little bit how you manage privacy in a composer-based install? So you don't have, if you post code on packages, it's generally publicly accessible, but I know there's a way to hide it. I just don't know how to do it.
So when you talk about...
Well, you're pulling directly from Git, not from packages.
For the configuration repository, yes, you can do it from, say, a private Bitbucket repository or a private GitHub repository, things that are private to you and your organization that nobody else can see, or you could just even spin up your own self-hosted Git repository or GitLab or whatever, and then keep it all internal.
So I guess what I'm asking about is the credentials for your Drupal to authenticate with the Git repository. I guess, is that on a per machine basis?
That's a good question. I think you'd be using keys and that sort of thing.
So that what Matt's asking about is basically building. So it's really like you have a build step and then you get a build artifact. So when you go to deploy, you're just pushing this combination of config and code that's already built as a build artifact. And then you have Jenkins or you have some other CI tool that, let's say, has a deployment key, a read-only deploy key that lets it pull in the config and the code and everything from your private repos.
Yeah, so basically keys. Any other questions?
I understand there's still a D8 version of features. What's up with that?
There is a D8 version of features. We are using it for our Drupal 8 version of BioWrapped. We're using it specifically to do things like set up a base content type and then layer on fields in other content types. So for example, if you have 5 content types that need location fields, you don't have to define those fields in all 5 of your content types. You only have to define it in your base content type and then layer on your other fields using features. So if you think of it like, programmatically, you can think of it like an abstract class that defines a base number of methods, and then your child classes put on their own specific classes. We're doing that same sort of thing with features. Features does, though, use the same configuration management system as everybody else. It's all still exported in YAML files. It's all still exported as part of your modules.
And it is subtractive, not additive.
That's correct. It's additive, not subtractive.
It's much easier, so it's going to have to add every single freaking thing.
Yeah.
Just pull off anything.
Exactly. All right. I would be remiss if I didn't talk. Oh, my slide all messed up. Oh. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about BioRaft. We are a silver sponsor here. We are hiring. What is BioRaft? BioRaft is Drupal as a platform as a service that we are hosting for researchers and safety and compliance. So specifically, our software helps prevent the zombie apocalypse by making sure that researchers who are working with radiological, chemical, and biological materials are safe, they're following protocols, there's review processes, there's training, there's certification. BioRaft manages all of that. We are hiring. We're looking for great people to join our team. Coders and specifically coders we're looking for. So if you're interested in a real challenge and you're interested in helping prevent the zombie apocalypse and the accidental creation of superheroes in labs, come talk to me. I'm around all day. Or talk to Peter, who's also with BioRaft. And so,
Your platform high trust certified?
yes. Yes, sir.
Can you repeat that?
The certifications, high trust certifications, yes, we have all of that. Yep, and it is exclusively built on Drupal. And we are currently rewriting it in Drupal 8. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate it.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I was your tardy room monitor.
Wait, Teresa thought she was the room monitor.
Oh, great. I wonder what room I was supposed
There may be
to
more
be
than
in.
one. What? Yeah, there should be 2, ideally.
Oh, good, a backup. I also thought it was at 1:45, so I was trying to be early when I got here at 1:35.